Thanks for your patience. I don't know how Scott ended up with all the gag lines. I don't think I've got any in my part of the talking. Now, as Scott's described, after doing this work looking at the forecasting process that the IPCC went through, we came to the conclusion that it's a political movement rather than an effort to make valid scientific forecasts about climate. And we're a couple of forecasting guys, so we thought, well, what next? We decided we wanted to forecast what the outcome of this political movement was going to be. So in order to do that, we chose a forecasting method that we developed relatively recently. We used and you won't be able to read that, will you? No. A scientific evidence-based method to choose it. This is the forecasting method selection tree that's on the forecasting principles site, and it encapsulates the principles that relate to selecting forecasting methods. And if you were able to read that tree, you could read your way down to the point where we get to the question of, well, are there similar situations? There's no quantitative data to speak of the forecast of political movement, so we're looking at subjective data, qualitative data, and we reason that there might be some similar situations in the past that we could use as data to forecast what's going to happen with this situation, this global warming alarm, how it's going to turn out. And the method to use in that situation is a method we developed called structured analogies. And I mean, as everyone knows, analogies are used very commonly in rhetoric and also to justify forecasts. Typically, any US foreign military intervention these days, the first analogy that's used in the media is the Vietnam War, and that was used for the invasion of Iraq. And the implied forecast is that, well, things will turn to custard, they'll turn out badly. I mean, other people who thought differently drew on another analogy, which was Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates, which, if you don't know about, is well worth reading up on. It's a lovely story, and you come to quite a different forecast. So analogies are used, as I say, informally, ex post justification, the first one that comes to mind. But we reason that they're about real people's behaviour and real situations in the past, so there should be some useful information in there. So we reasoned that if we could develop a method that encouraged the experts to look at analogies in a structured way and analyse them in a structured way, to think of as many as they could, then we might be able to come up with some useful information for forecasting. And so we devised a method, and we tested that across 8 diverse conflict situations. And these situations, one of them was a war, another was a corporate takeover battle, and there were some union management disputes and various other conflicts. I mean, essentially, we were trying to get as diverse a group of conflicts as we could, diverse a group of situations as we could, given our resources. And in order for any forecasting method to be useful, it's got to be at least better than chance. And as it happens, we offered between 3 and 6 decision options for each of these 8 situations. So on average, if you were guessing, you'd expect to get 28%, be 28% right. So that's the basic benchmark. The next benchmark is what the current forecasting method is, which is expert judgment. It's people sitting in the White House or around board tables, talking it over and using their judgment to come up with predictions for what will happen for particular strategies and so on. So we sent we sent the descriptions of these conflicts to experts, and half of the experts that we sent them to, we asked them to make their best forecast. So they would go about it in the way that they normally would, and the other half we gave them this structured analogies procedure to use. Now the experts that didn't get the structured analogies instructions, they provided us with 106 forecasts, and of those 32% were accurate. So not that much different from guessing, essentially. And incidentally, we did this with students as well, undergraduate students mostly, and they were much the same, 32, 33%, might have been 31, I forget now. And the structured analogies method, we derive forecasts from the information the experts sent back to us, and the forecasts were on average 56% accurate, and more accurate again with combining. So we reason this method can give us some useful forecasts about this current conflict, the global warming alarm political movement. There's the paper. Now, so we derived a procedure specifically for this problem, and what we did, we started by casting the net widely, looking for as many situations that were at least broadly similar to the global warming alarm as we could, the alarm of the political movement, and screened for similarity, and then coded the outcomes of the selected analogies for interesting variables, interesting outcome variables, and derive forecasts from the outcomes of those analogies. So here are our criteria. When we started putting these together, we were quite specific about it, as you'll see, based on forecasts of material catastrophe arising from effects of human activity on the physical environment. That's criteria number 1 of 3. And as we were framing these up, we were thinking, well, we might have a few problems finding analogies here, because it's quite a narrow definition. And of course, it's important that these alarming forecasts are endorsed by scientists, politicians, and the media, as global warming has been, and that there are calls for strong actions to be taken in response to this alarming forecast. So those were our criteria, and as I say, we were a little bit concerned we might not get too many analogies. We sent an email, I'm not going to read this out, we sent an email out with that text in it, essentially describing the IPCC, the global warming alarm movement, and saying that we want analogies for this to many experts, including the IPCC. People, I can't remember how many actually responded. I got one extremely rude response that ended with, please take, well, it wasn't please, it was take me off your mailing list, otherwise I'll make your life hell and you'll never get a job again, kind of thing. So we started this a bit more than a year ago, and to our surprise, we ended up with an initial sample of 71 proposed analogies, and we narrowed it down. We compared them to our criteria, and we narrowed it down to 26 analogies that we were regarded as proper analogies to the movement that we were looking at. So Scott and I have done these initial assessments of similarity. Our intentions are to seek independent assessments of similarity from other experts, and I'm certainly interested in anyone who'd like to take part in this process. And in order to aid getting good independent assessments of whether we've got these analogies right and coded them correctly, we've well, here we are. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit ahead of myself. I mean, here's six analogies. And if you were at breakfast, on the DDT one I was going to talk a little bit about, but if you're at breakfast, you know that story. Well, that was a surprise to me. I mean, perhaps I don't read the paper closely enough, but I think maybe the headline saying DDT isn't dangerous and it's killed millions of people. The banning of it has been responsible for the deaths of millions of kids from malaria and so on. I missed that headline, so I still thought DDT was a bad thing until I started going through this exercise. And similarly with some of these other ones here, Paul Ehrlich in his '74 book, if I remember correctly, I think he was predicting a US population of about 50 million in 1990, because food was going to run out and all the resources that modern industrial civilization need will have run out, before then, and will have all have starved to death, or all barring 50 million. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of it. Here's of the analogies. Here's the full list of the 26 that we've got at the moment, which I'm not going to go through, but just you might get a bit of an impression from it of what's there. So in order to help us make sure it's not just our interpretation of things, and we're putting maybe we're putting a slant on things and not knowing enough about them, we're developing these thumbnail sketches of the situations. Of the analogies, about a page for each of them, and we're looking to get peer review on those. So we've got about 6 of them, 7 of them so far, and there's about another 3 in the pipeline, and we'd love help on this, because it's very hard to get people with the right skills to distill down all the information and come up with unbiased accounts of them. So this is the broad outline of a sketch of an analogous situation. So we use the DDT one as an example. So we want the date. And what was the forecast of impending disaster? Well, in this case, it was that DDT would lead to great increases in human cancer, and it would lead to destruction of wildlife. And the forecasting method to come up with that dramatic forecast, as best we could gather, was a scenario based on speculation. And Scott talked a little bit about scenarios. They're not a valid forecasting method. And what actions were called for? Well, a ban, an international ban on DDT was called for. And this call for a ban and the forecast was endorsed by leading scientists and politicians, including Al Gore, and the media. So, I hope you're seeing the parallels here. What was the outcome? Well, the outcome, as you know from this morning's talk, was a ban and millions of deaths that otherwise would not have occurred. I think the ban's been reversed in recent years, finally. So none of the 26 forecasts that we looked at were based on scientific forecasting. None of these alarming forecasts. We characterised them in 3 different ways, the forecasting methods, and one of them was the use of unrealistic mathematical models, as in Malthus. If you think of Malthus, he said that population was going to grow geometrically, but food production was only going to grow arithmetically, and as with Paul Ehrlich, we're all going to starve to death horribly, or lots of us were. So unrealistic mathematical models. Another one was like the radiation story, extrapolating from massive doses of radiation lead to all kinds of nasty effects, including death. And if you extrapolate that down to 0, as Linus Pauling did, you come to the conclusion that even with relatively small doses of radiation, you're going to get a lot of extra deaths, and therefore we should get rid of all radiation. But it turned out that the relationship was U-shaped, and that reasonable levels of background radiation result in longer, healthier lives. Extrapolating from a weak effect, we think we found something here. Gosh, it could be much worse. It could be widespread. It could be right through the population. That kind of thing. Mostly there were calls for government action. 25 out of the 26 analogies, there were calls for government action. None of the forecasts were based on scientific forecasting procedures. So, what proportion do you think were right? Well, by chance you'd have thought at least some of them would turn out to be right. But we found that 19 of the 26 were categorically wrong, just completely and utterly wrong. 7 were wrong in degree. It was a trivial problem rather than an alarming problem, and none of them were accurate. So there might be a slight bias there, because as I say, perhaps you'd expect some of them to have been accurate by chance. The policies were adopted, and what have we got? 23 out of the 25 analogies, government policies were put in place, and the usual things happened: increase of taxes, increase of government spending, and decreases in liberties, freedoms, ability to make your own decisions. Did the government intervention help? Anyone want to take any guesses on the proportion there? Well, 20 out of the 23 cases harm was caused, and we weren't too sure about 3 of them. Wasn't terribly clear. So none of them were obviously effective in any way. And given the dollars that are involved in policy on climate change, that's pretty scary. And these are our forecasts from our structured analogies process. We had some impressions as well from going through this exercise. And we think perhaps the rate of alarms are increasing over time. Perhaps there's fewer real things to worry about. Alarms are very good at attracting media attention, but when they're discredited, they just tend to fade from the media attention, rather than we don't have this equivalent screaming headlines when the alarm is found not to be true. So it's a bit of a one-sided process. So as a result of that, people like me, and I imagine others, continue to believe a lot of those old alarms. People are still concerned about electromagnetic being too close to power lines and things like that caused a fright among people for a while, and still do. People still don't want to live near power lines. And so, as a result of this, we've realised, rather belatedly, I suppose, that we're looking at quite a common social phenomenon. And here's a nice little quote from 1990. As soon as one predicted disaster doesn't occur, the doomsayers skip to another. Why don't they see that in the aggregate things are getting better? Why do they always think that we're at a turning point or at the end of the road? And that was from Julian Simon, quoted in a New York Times piece at the time that he'd won his bet against Paul Ehrlich on all the resources running out. Ehrlich was not at all gracious in defeat. He said that Julian Simon was lucky in betting that we weren't going to run out of everything. But here's an even earlier one. Julian Simon wasn't the first, and I imagine there'll be even earlier ones. on what principle is it that when we see nothing but improvement behind us, we are to expect nothing but deterioration before us. That was 1830, Macaulay. So there are our conclusions, and you can find our material on this on the publicpolicyforecasting.com site. And please do contact me if you're interested in participating and helping us out with this.